Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, How to Improve with Technical Modernisation Services from the Public Sector for the Public. Our webinar today is a co-presentation between Procensol and Appian, and we are lucky to be joined by not one, but two experts. First of all, we have Manish Tripathy, Head of Delivery at Procensol. Hello, Manish. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Pete, and hello everyone for joining us today in another one of the webinars that we are doing. And I must say I'm particularly excited for this one because it is one of my favorite topics. So yeah, can't wait.
Yes, no, I know. From the dry run, you were really into it, so I'm lucky. It's going to be a great show, I think. We're also joined by Vishal Hanjan, Global Industry Lead for State and Local Government at Appian. Thank you for joining us, Vishal.
Hi, Pete. I'm happy to be here. Hey, Manish. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Yes, it's going to be really, really good having the two of you going at this topic, I think. For those who don't know me, and I don't see any reason why you should, I'm Pete Ames. I am here purely to facilitate. So I'm here to keep everybody concise and make sure that when we do go wandering down some interesting cul-de-sacs, we get back on track at the same time. Ultimately, the goal is that you leave this webinar richer for having attended. Now, we're also joined by the lovely Rebecca.
Hi, yes, I'm Rebecca Mackay. I am Head of Marketing ANZ at Procensol. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I'm glad you're here, Rebecca, because you are going to be in charge of our chat, aren't you?
I am indeed, yes.
Yes. So for those that aren't used to one of our webinars, we are going to be taking a recording. So this is being recorded and will be made available to everybody after the fact. And there will be a very interesting white paper on the themes we're discussing today, which is also going to be provided. You're getting early doors access. The reason I mentioned that Rebecca is going to be in the chat is because this is a Q&A-led webinar. We want you to put questions in, ask, and walk away from this with your personal, rather selfish answers, questions answered. So just to make sure everybody knows how that works, if you could just move your mouse around, at the bottom you should see the chat button. If you click on that, the chat window will open. And we are using the chat because we have set it so that only myself, Rebecca, Manish, and Vishal can see the chat. So you can ask questions very openly without fear of someone realizing something about the state of play in your particular team. So to make sure that we've actually got this, can I ask who here has actually been part of a large public sector tech project? Just put a yes or a no for me. And while you're there, what are you hoping to take from today's webinar? We'll come back to that fairly shortly. So back on the topic, today's agenda, we are going to cover the current challenges facing the public sector. We are going to discuss how you can approach big change in an accessible manner. And we're going to talk about some of the advantages of the modern technology and how it can enable an improvement to this change. So let's get cracking on that. First of all, just before I do, Rebecca, have we had any answers in the chat?
We have. Yeah, it's been a busy chat today. So yes, majority of people have been part of a big tech project, but not all of them work directly in government, which is interesting.
Yes, I like the sound of that. It is going to be a bit of a mix then for us. That's very good. Right, okay, let's crack into the first question. Current challenges in the public sector. Technology has always been important in the public sector, and the pandemic seems to have unlocked something. And all of a sudden, there is a lot more appetite. I know, Vishal, when we were doing the practice run, you gave me some great rundown on some of the challenges facing the public sector in achieving this new appetite. Can you just walk us through what you're seeing with your government clients and prospects?
Sure. I think there's a wide variety of challenges that they're facing, Pete. By and large, the ones that I hear about the most, there's the obvious application modernization, right? We need to modernize the technology portfolio, do it fast, but keep it within budget, right? And there's a lot of things involved in that in terms of where to start, what technology you use, so on. There's the workforce angle, right? So there's a lot of the workforce that's either retired or getting pretty close to it now. There's also your turnover that's gone up, right? It's gone up around the world since the pandemic, and they've certainly seen it in government as well. And then the final big one I would probably put my finger on is greater access for citizens to government services, and that almost invariably involves technology in some way.
Yeah, and I think that third one is really interesting because there is definitely more appetite for access to these things, and there's also more willingness to try and provide it. Out of interest, what's the main driving force, do you think? Is it that government has changed its attitude, or is it that people's expectations have changed?
That's a great question. I think it's both. I think for both of those, in terms of the people's expectations, let's start with that one. You and I we can purchase almost anything from our phone, from our home, right? We can buy a car if we wanted to using our phone and using a mobile application. Yet it's not quite as easy to access government services. The other one that you touched on is whether government folks themselves have changed as well. And I have seen that in the time that I've been in public sector. There was a time that technology was simply an assistive mechanism for citizens. It was, let's give them a website where they can go and find some information. But now it's increasingly become, front and center. And we need to provide citizens with a digital front door that they come through and access the services that they need. So I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah, I love that. I love that digital front door piece. I think that's a really nice image for what we're seeing. And I think, like you say, it's been a real change. One of the things I realized very recently is that millennials, of which I count myself, snowflakes that we are now the oldest members of my generation are now 40 years old. People forget that that's how old we are now, and we are an internet first generation. And you've got Gen Z behind us coming up, and they're the oldest of them are in their 20s now. They're a significant part. We're a huge part now of the user base for these government services. And our expectation is absolutely self-service, quick access, do what I want when I need to do it, not when the office is open. So I agree. I think it is a driving force between the two, especially following on my conversations with you. Could I ask, where do you think that the government appetite is coming from? Do you think it's coming from, I'm going to use an English description, the civil service element of government, or is it coming from the elected officials trying to meet the demands of the electorate?
Surprisingly, now I think it's really shifted a lot to the elected officials. There's an increasing amount. If you look across, especially at the state and local government, which is where I spend most of my time, you see a lot of it's not spoken about as if it's a nice to have. Technology and the access to citizens has become a norm. I mean, those two things are interlinked. It's not. When we talk about citizen need, it's funny, years ago, those two words weren't used in the same sentence in the same way. It was, well, the citizen needs to provide X, Y, and Z in order to get this benefit from the government. And now we talk about the citizen need as, well, it's something that the citizen needs, and therefore we should be there to provide it to them, right? And no longer are some of the ways that we did that before on paper, especially. We've since learned that there are faster ways to achieve that. So I think it's really shifted it. And I think a lot of elected officials have recognized that this is something that's important to their constituency. So they've made it a part of their platform. Yeah,
and I think you touched on another really good word there, faster. For a long time, the word efficiency, when uttered by a politician, meant headcount cut services. Sure. And I think there's a recognition now that actually the secret to efficiency is technology. Unleash technology and you push into it a massive efficiency saving for a lot of people. So I think there's also an element of that going on. But I don't want to dwell too much on this. That's not why we're here. I think we all especially for our attendees, they're familiar with this, they live this world. It's just interesting to bring it out into the open because it's going to make the hurdles make much more sense. So I'm going to move on. Thank you, Vishal. I'm going to come to you, Manish. What are the hurdles? We know there's the appetite now, but what are the hurdles that are in the way for government bodies to deliver on this expectation?
Sure, like Pete. So as we just touched on the speed with which the transformation is needed to be delivered, there are fair few problems or hurdles. If you're looking at developing something new, it's not going to be that troublesome. So most of the time, what I find is when I'm having a conversation with my customer and they're trying to give me a landscape of where their problem lies, it always boils down to the legacy system. Now, considering the legacy system, there are some fair facts, and there are some which are just a perception as well, because either we are not aware or we are not up to date on what technology is bringing nowadays. So if we talk about the real hurdles that the legacy system brings in, and I'll probably emphasize a little bit more on this, it is a real problem which kind of keeps most of us awake during the night. So there's no denying the fact that yes, it is one of the burning problems that everyone wants to solve. Now, where the actual problem lies with the legacy system is quite often they are siloed. So you may have 5 or 6 different systems that does that particular job specifically, precisely, but they just don't talk to each other. So you may have that data sitting in 5 or 6 different applications, but it's really hard to interpret that data, make some meaningful insight out of that information, because they were never built that way. Or we started a journey, we built one application, the process kept on evolving, the business kept on evolving, and more and more applications were just piled up, stacked on that legacy technology stack, without paying much attention to how these things are going to work together in the architectural landscape. So that's one of the biggest problems with the legacy system. And quite often what also happens is we know that, hey, there is a real problem here, but we have a perception that we have to live with it. It's going to be very painful. We can't get rid of it because it is so deeply rooted. And and then
anybody that's ever been involved, I've been involved in a big project to move off a legacy IT system. And if you've ever been near one of those, you don't ever want to do it again. I think that's fair to say, isn't it? Yeah, once bitten, twice shy.
That's because of the scary experience that we have had. Everyone would have some scars when they go back and look into the legacy transformation that they have done in the past. But as I was saying, we have moved on. The technology has evolved, and that's where it comes and is there to aid us in that journey. So rather than looking at how we can duct tape a particular problem, we should be looking at what is the long-term strategy. What is it that we are going to do, which is actually going to help us in the longer run, and not just specifically focus on this particular problem. So addressing the legacy problem is quite an interesting topic as well. Sometimes what people do is, hey, I have 10 different problems. Let me go out, maybe
try and buy one solution to meet those 10 problems. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. You talk about the technology moving on. We are going to touch on that a little later in the webinar. I know, and it's difficult to draw the line there. But I just wanted to pick on something else you said about legacy systems. You mentioned that quite often they've been batched together. That it's not one legacy system. It's a whole set of them operating in a weird interaction. That quite often also brings the additional challenge of a sort of a siloed, protected mentality about systems, doesn't it? You can't touch that because if you do, it might make my world worse. So you need to get an entire organization to buy into a change. Is that right?
That's absolutely true. Because when we are looking at making some changes, often what people would say is, hey, that particular system, it is working as it is supposed to. It's a dark room nobody wants to get into. And they'll say, it would be really nice if you don't touch it, because as you were saying, if you touch it, it's going to break these 5 different things. And then in order to either upgrade these 5 different systems or maintain it, just keep the lights clean, I will be relying on 5 different teams who have these 5 different skills. So you see how suddenly making a small change in one of the legacy system just finds its way and routes out to other applications as well. And that's where it becomes scary when we actually start talking about bringing modernization or making some enhancements to the processes or the application which are there.
Yeah, and I mean, again, if you've ever been part of an IT change that resulted in something breaking a long way down the line, and the anger that comes from the people who own that system, you don't want to get stuck in that situation twice. I am just going to ask actually to the audience. We've had a few challenges from Manish. There's one more I'm going to pull out of you, Manish, because we talked about it in the prep session. I think it's really interesting and not often thought of. But are there any other challenges that we haven't spoken about yet when it comes to these, this push for change and improvements, hitting these barriers? So please pop any that you come to your mind in the chat. I'd like to get them all out in the open before we move on. While that comes in, Manish, the other one that was sort of bounced around was that knowledge is being lost at quite a quick rate now, isn't it, about how these legacy systems and processes are put together?
Absolutely. So simple way of looking at it is, when these legacy systems were built, it will probably go back to 10 years, 20 years, don't know how long. And if you look at the people who are actually using those systems, they have came fair way with the application. So they have been living with that system. They have been breathing in and out that system for this entire 20 years. So they have got absolute expertise in how to use the system. And it also becomes challenging because when you're trying or talking to them and you bring in, hey, you talk about the conversation where you're trying to bring in a change, they certainly start seeing this as a big change which is coming into the industry. And they just feel that they're not prepared for it. And again, one of the awareness thing, which if people are not aware on what the technology is going to do for them, rather than looking at it as an aid, they start thinking of the technology coming in and making their life and their job difficult. But coming back to the real problem, what happens is, these people who have, they do their job well, and they really do it because of the experience that they have gained, because of the work they have been doing for that long period. But we have to agree to the fact that at some point, since it is an aging population, they are going to, leave the organization, or they're going to find their way out the door. Now, as soon as that happens, it's not only that knowledge moving out, it's also the expertise of someone having, that comfort with 5 or 10 different old systems. As soon as you bring in the new people, they'll start complaining about how clunky the experience is, where they have to talk to 10 different systems. They have to keep on swiveling their chair because we are talking about the new generation or the younger generation. So that's one of the gaps that I feel as well.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. You've actually also got an additional challenge, really, that when someone with 20 years experience in the IT side of things, it's amazing how much business knowledge is going with them, not just about how the systems work, but why they're that way, why they were put that way together, 10 years ago, who the team that was part of their original design, from the business end has moved on, moved up, moved out. And actually, the IT guy remembers the very good reasons it was set up that way in the first place. All of that walks out the door when they go as well. And that's, more and more of these people are nearing retirement. There's a lot of job opportunities to jump around. It's just an interesting challenge. I'm conscious of time, so I am going to draw a line. I am just going to quickly ask Rebecca. Rebecca, has there been anything in the chat about the challenges, any other challenges that people have faced? Yeah,
and it's one thing that I've heard across many discussions I've had is that getting the right data out of the system, particularly if you've made a change to the system, and actually understanding what data they need to get out of the system.
Yeah, there is. That's a really, really interesting point. And I think I'm going to come to you, Vishal, on this one. Part of this generation shift of comfort with, there's also simultaneously this huge belief that if we have access to the data, we can obtain a lot of insights, we can do a lot of things. but quite often in a project, it's left to the last, it's not thought about, and then all of a sudden people don't have access to what they wanted. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's spot on, because for me, just in all of the various projects that I worked on, I think data in some way, shape, or form was an oversight when it came to one aspect, and that is the story that you needed the data to tell. Right? I think there's a lot of transactional data is easy in the sense that we know what data we need to collect in order to provide a service, generally speaking, right? From a government agency's perspective. I need to know your first name, your last name, your address, and so on. But the data that needs to shape some sort of a story and be able to provide some other decision-making metrics down the road, or even just reporting. A lot of times it's reporting that government has to do to other government agencies, right? Especially if there's funding or financials involved. And that too often comes kind of late in the project. One of the ways that you tackle the challenge is to make sure that you enable the capability to be there, even if you don't know the exact story up front. But I think the more that you try to understand, take the transactional data out and try to understand what that story is that you need to be able to tell, or what your system needs to be able to tell you, I think that gets you a long way to you almost look at it like a working backward, right? The story that I need to know is that we had this type of success or this type of failure in this many different services that we provided over this period of time. Okay, that's great. Knowing that, going in, you can actually help shape it. But then also, if you've got the capability in your technology to add that later without adding a ton of overhead, I think that, that's really going to go a long way.
I think that's a really good point, actually. Like, it's, as a business user in the past, I was asked, what data do you want? And my response was almost invariable, I don't know what you got, type thing.
Right.
And let me see what you've got, I'll play and I'll figure out what it is. And I think that story piece is a really good way of approaching it. But it's also important to acknowledge that you'll never get it 100% right from the get-go. Classic one is, right, okay, great, we've got all of that, we know what's happened. How long did it take for that stage to move to that stage to move to that stage? Oh, we've not logged when things happen in that way that you can access the reporting. Well, can we open it back up, go back in? Right. I think we've hit the nail on the head of the challenges. I'm sure most of these have resonated with people. Just a quick reminder, we've had people putting in the chat, but I think I saw a few more people sneaking in after we got started. So we're using the chat for questions. If anything we've discussed so far as a question, or you just want to throw in a confirmation that, yeah, that's the world you're living in, please do pop them in the chat. Rebecca is going to be there to take them, and we will be doing a Q&A at the end of this webinar. Now let's pick up what when we were doing the planning for this, we thought was probably the most important topic to talk about in this modernization of government, which is traditionally, for a long time, IT was big project, huge budget, trying to achieve lots of simultaneous things, catastrophic failure, recriminations, finger pointing, don't want to do it again. And there's a phrase that I love that I think really breaks this down. How do we eat the elephant? There's all of this change that needs to happen relatively quickly. How do we eat the elephant? And of course, the answer to that one, Vishal, is
one bite at a time.
Damn straight. I like that. So can you take us through, you had a lovely approach for this that I thought was really practical. And people, you may want to get a pen and paper here, because I think Vishal's about to drop some knowledge bombs. Can you talk us through how you recommend anybody approaches this push for change?
Sure. It's like so many things, Pete. It's overwhelming if you look at it all at once, right? Because a complex technology landscape is the norm in government. Let's just start with that, right? So anybody who's like, well, I'm dealing with, a lot of the things that Manish described, where I've got these legacy systems that have been kind of piled on top of each other. And then we went out and bought some other point solutions and we added that to the mix. Chances are you're not the only ones experiencing that, right? That tends to be the norm. But, what you and I were talking about the other day, and this is actually surprisingly one that when I've spoken to government agencies, people do have a tendency to write this down. Just simplify pieces of it, right? So what I recommend is you start with a technology inventory. And what I mean by that is that you start by taking a look at that landscape and understanding what's in it to begin with, right? And you don't have to, quote unquote, boil the ocean in order to figure that out. What you would really do is take your technology, figure out what business function it's for, what's the age of the technology, what is it, right? You have to identify it, what's the age of it, and then really capture a couple of just key metrics, and what I look for is any key business issues, anything that's affecting really three key areas: efficiency, mission of the agency, or cost, right? I mean, if you've got something that's a detriment in those areas, chances are it has your attention for a reason. You start by doing that, and now you've got some understanding anyway of what's in that landscape. As a next step, you can add additional attributes. You can go and say, okay, I'm hearing, we're seeing a lot of issues with this technology, which happens to be 12 years old, or, I'm making things up. But now let's take a look at that. Is it up for renewal? Is it supported any longer by the manufacturer? You'd be surprised at how many things are no longer supported by the manufacturer that government agencies still unfortunately have to run, right? And so when you start with that, you get those bites of that elephant.
Yeah, you basically you start those diagrams you see in butchers with all of the different cuts. That's effectively what you're doing. You're saying, right, what are all the things that need to be done? And I guess sometimes that can that be overwhelming for people because that can be quite a big list when it's initially put together, I guess. Any advice on sort of and that's I think where it maybe is a good time to come to you, Manish, because in the last, not quite sure about the timescales, but the last few years, low code has really started to come to the fore as an approach, which kind of circumvents that you've got to eat the elephant in one bite. It enables you to go at it one piece at a time. And can you just talk to us a little bit about, just very briefly, what low code is, and then how it lets you approach these things one bite at a time?
Sure. So the way low code is kind of seen or perceived by people as a technology which is going to enable you to make changes faster. You don't have to actually write hundreds or thousands of lines of code. You're not doing a full stack development where you need a big team of people sitting in a particular pod and doing something for months or years to get the things out. And that's where, when we are talking about delivering something on a low-code platform, such as Appian, you basically are using the low code to deliver quick outcomes. And that's where, as Vishal was saying, once you have identified the first bit that you want to automate, where you want to show the return on investment, you go ahead and you find a project which is not going to be fairly complex, because you want to produce the return on investment quickly and then demonstrate this to the business. So I think in Appian's technology, or in Appian lay of the land, we call it the snowball impact. So you start small and you keep on rolling, you keep on adding multiple projects. That's how you go ahead with the low code platform. So you pick up one, make a razor focus impact on business by giving them the benefits or return on investment on a particular use case. And what happens is, once you have implemented and rolled that particular solution out, you suddenly start getting people from other parts of the business interacting about it as well. And they get enthusiastic about, oh, wow, this is a new thing which is coming in. And it only took us 2 months or maybe 3 months to get to where we wanted to be. And we have been stuck into this particular situation for ages. We just did not opportunity to go out. Now, the typical way Appian would be adopted, or a low-code platform would be adopted in an organization where you have a very difficult landscape of legacy systems is, you can build new applications on the platform. So we are talking about some greenfield implementation. If it is a new project, you just go ahead and implement it on the low-code platform itself, such as Appian. The other way of approaching it is where you let the system be where they are, because you don't want to bring in a lot of disturbance quite suddenly. So you leave the system there, and then Appian or a low-code platform can just sit in there and augment the functionality. So it's easier to get the data out of the system and then bubble them up or bring them up to a level where you then get a unified view of the data. So in Appian's terminology, we call it a single pane of glass. So you can let your systems be there. Appian can be sitting there, augmenting the business, and at the same time, it can furnish all the information which is actually sitting in different applications to give you that meaningful insight and just move your business forward.
Yeah. Okay. So I think two things here, because I know about low code. I've been on some of these webinars before. Let me just double check with the audience. If you are familiar, which I imagine most of you are, you know Appian, you know Procensol, so you're probably familiar with low code. But if you're still not clear, please pop in the chat, and we're happy to answer any questions and clarify any points. But just let me summarize very quickly then. So essentially, you can, tying back to the earlier points we said that were hurdles, you can leave your legacy systems exactly where they are. You're not going to touch anything. You're not going to change anything. You install Appian or another low-code platform, let's acknowledge that they do exist, on top. And then you can start drawing the data out, and you can even start pulling functionality up into the new system, and then either just leave the legacy systems there untouched running, or more likely, since you mentioned, Vishal, there's these issues of things running out of support, and the expertise to maintain them is getting harder to find. You can slowly pull the functionality up until the legacy system is almost hollowed out, and you've done it very safely, and then you can mothball it and move on to the next piece. And that's essentially what allows us to eat the elephant one bite at a time. What I think was also very interesting was Manish talked about snowballing, and I know when we were doing the prep, you had, I think, some interesting stories about this where you've seen this happen. Could you just talk us through what that snowballing effect looks like when it really happens?
Yeah, sure. So this goes back to one of the early engagements that we.
Sorry, Manish. Sorry, that was very naughty of me. That was a question for Vishal. I want to bring him back into the conversation.
Sure. Yeah. I'm sure there are multiple examples of this. Just one that comes to mind is an agency that was, in the effort of modernizing, and it affected the same community of users that were, at another agency as well, because as citizens, sometimes, obviously, you need to talk to multiple government agencies. And initially, when they set out on this initiative to modernize, they didn't have really the support of any other agency. So they kind of went at it alone. And as it became successful, one piece at a time, the other agencies that were reluctant at first now came knocking on their door to become part of the initiative. And so this is something, when Manish talks about the snowball effect, I think it's pretty powerful. And let me just say, and I love the way that you described, Pete, when you put that single pane of glass on top with Appian, and you can leave data where it is and access it through data anywhere within Appian, you can do exactly what you talked about. You're effectively extending the service life of some of these systems while replacing them at the same time, but you're doing it on your time, right? You're doing it at a pace that makes sense to you. So there's this natural snowball effect that's created, which it's not just from a technology perspective. I mean, some of these modernization efforts, the reason that they fail, if you really look into it, is also managing the change from a people perspective, right? Because it's not just technology, it's people as well. So a nice thing in all of what we've just talked about now is that the snowball over time grows as people see some of these successes and they become a part of it, right? And there's this gradual momentum and a very natural sort of momentum that's gained over time because you did start a little bit small, and you didn't start with it all at once.
Yeah, it's almost, obviously, I think most people who are going to be on this will have come across the concept of agile project deployment and development. And it almost feels like I've been on agile projects that were not agile because the system we were trying to install or change simply didn't lend itself to that small, quick changes, move on, because they weren't quick to change. And if you made something wrong in a configuration, it was a nightmare to unpick. You did have to plan the whole thing out. Whereas with what you've got with the low-code platform now, you can just say, oh, please go back and change that piece over there. Don't worry about it, it'll be fine. That's what this enables. So it's almost unlocked that small, quick successes, deliver value fast. That's one of the real hallmarks of this approach, isn't it? And then do it again and do it again and build confidence, build trust, and start to overcome some of this well-earned cynicism that departments and agencies have towards IT projects. And I think that's, it's almost saying the tech's not the great bit. The great bit is that you can start to win buy-in from people. And that snowballing piece, I think, is wonderful. I am conscious of time, so I am just going to move us on a little bit, if that's okay. Rebecca, have we had any questions come in that sort of need to be interrupted, or are we okay to wait for Q&A at the end?
I did have one come in, and they are saying, when talking about replacing legacy systems, how does low code or Appian integrate with a COTS solution like Salesforce? Do they integrate well? Is it difficult? Can it be done?
Okay, right. I need someone to put their hand up. I don't know who this is best pushed to. Manish or Vishal? Who's going to take it?
I can take this.
Okay, Manish.
So with Appian or a low-code platform, integration to the COTS product is quite easy. Such as the examples that you were talking about, Rebecca. If you're looking at integration with Salesforce or SharePoint, Appian has pre-built components. So although it is a low-code platform at the first place, you get the advantage of having a pre-built component. So it just makes it even more faster. You just drag, drop, double click, say, hey, this is the URL, these are the credentials, and you're done. And then what it does is it suddenly exposes all the operations that you can do now, which in the other side of the world, you would have spent a lot of time writing those code, testing, and making sure that, hey, everything is working fine. So a lot of these things are pre-built, available for us to go ahead and consume. In certain scenarios, so if we talk about the other side of the COTS product, which are not that widely used, where you may want to integrate with those systems, there's still a couple of ways. So as far as the system that you're trying to integrate, if they can expose the data using one of the widely accepted norms such as REST APIs or SOAP services, we can go in and consume that easily. In absence of that, if the data is sitting in a database, Appian can easily connect to that database, and we'll be leveraging the same concept that we just spoke about. So you treat the system as one of your legacy system, but since the data is there, Appian can still access it, and then we can get the same benefits that we just spoke about. In some of the systems where it is really hard, you can even think of deploying modern technologies such as robotic process automation, where you can do some screen or just go into that system, try to imitate what a person would do, click in here, click in there, download this Excel, extract it, send it out in an email. So there are multiple ways we can do that. So totally depends on what is the state of the other system that we are trying to integrate, but we have gone through that journey. We have done it time and again. So very confident that yes, you can achieve that.
Yeah, I remember on a previous webinar we did, someone described sort of the low-code Appian platforms as kind of like, imagine trying to build a house. You want a very custom, bespoke layout interior, but the plumbing, the electrics, they're all very standardized. The equivalent of those REST and SOAP integrations, and Appian comes out of the box really able to take advantage of them, but can also do other things. So, okay, thank you for answering that question for us, Manish. I am going to move on to a few other things that are perhaps less obvious benefits of this kind of Appian low-code approach, which tie back to the hurdles we talked about earlier. Now, one of them was, the ease of getting people up to speed on it. So, to flip it round, how do we avoid this platform that we are now building, this low-code platform layer, becoming just a future legacy system that in 2033 is a nightmare to find skills for, we have to change because it's not supported. How does it avoid that, Manish?
Sure. So it brings to my memory one of the Gartner report, which was published in 2021, where they were saying that back in 2020, the level of automation or the use of low-code platform, it was confined to 25% or less than 25%. But there's a projection that by 2025, not even 2030, this percentage is going to rise up to 75%. So the immediate question that comes to your mind is, if there is a prediction that this is going to come, how are we going to service it? Where are those resources? So everyone is joining hands in this approach. So to start with, I'll probably go back where, how I picked up the platform. So I picked the platform back in 2008 or 2009, where you have all these set of instructions, documentation on how you can use this low-code platform. Now, from there till now, the platform has evolved. It has become easier to learn, although it was already easier at that point because it was still a low-code platform. But with the evolution of the platform and the technology, it is only getting easier and easier for someone to understand and pick up the platform. Now, Appian themselves, they are doing university drives where we are educating people about low code, adding more skill to the workforce. We do that internally as well. So as internally in Procensol, we would go ahead and hire graduates from university, and we have a specified training program that we put forward so they can be trained on Appian. Further, when we are working with the customers, we try to enable them internally. So we'll pick up a few, fair few people who have some understanding or who are deeply interested in consulting and enabling the business to do that transformation. So they'll come along, they'll join the journey, and while we are implementing it, they try to utilize that opportunity where they have a few experts around, where they can learn the platform and see how things are done. So that's a few items that comes to my mind on how we are going to service this particular industry, or how the skill shortage is probably not going to be a problem. And certainly, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's all right. I was nodding along. I've got something I want to say now, but I'm still listening to you.
No, that's all right. So I was just trying to summarize that. Yes, everyone is looking towards that. It's easy. We have certain plans already in place. People are adopting to this platform, and more than earlier, people are now expressing their interest in learning the low-code platform as well. Now, one of the easy way of learning the platform is just going to the community and trying things out for yourself. The other thing is, it is difficult for someone to train other people if you are talking about 1,000 lines of code, writing the code in a particular way, particular fashion. But what becomes easy is just drawing the process. That's something quite often we do. Like, when you're talking to a business analyst or even a business personnel, what they would do is they'll go ahead and they'll start drawing. They'll use whiteboard, they'll use Visio, they'll do, sometimes even on a Word document. That's the exact thing that you do on platforms like Appian, which are low code. So you design your process models, and with little tweaks and a pinch of salt, that process that you just designed becomes executable. And now that is what actually runs in your production system. So, just by talking about this, it seems that it is so easy. It is actually easy when we actually do that. So, yeah, that's how I would summarize this.
Yeah, I think when we were doing the breakthroughs, the planning, the pre-run through, I think there was, I can't remember if it was me trying to understand, but the way you kind of left me understanding yours, this is a platform that if you are computer savvy, you don't need to be C++, Python, 2 years university educated, whatever, to be able to get to grips with this, taking 6 months to understand it. If you've just got that, almost, if you're comfortable going into Excel and writing some complex formula, you've got the right kind of brain to be able to pick this up and learn to use it very quickly by watching over someone's shoulder as they start implementing it. Is that about the level we're talking now?
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah. Okay, I can see now why the skills problem isn't a problem, because those people will always exist and can easily be pulled into the situation. Vishal, I'm going to come to you now as well, because I think, Manish has talked about the classic problem of skills. That's always a problem. One of the other problems that you get with legacy systems over time is the slow accrual of patches and updates they need to remain secure, to stay up to date. And again, there are some advantages that aren't immediately obvious with a low-code platform. So could you just talk to me about that, please?
Sure. One of the things, like when it came to patches and things like anything that involves the underlying technology to be kept up to date, at least from the very least a security angle, right? And more than that, sometimes a usability angle, that rested really on the shoulders of business. They'd have to make sure that they knew that a patch had been released, what it contained, potentially what it was going to break in their software. And they would have to, because that's sort of inevitable at times, right? And they would have to schedule that and then take their system down and apply it and so on. So there's a lot there to do from a manual perspective. With Appian, you've got it running in the cloud, and patches are applied by Appian, automatically in terms of the things that we need to figure out before they're applied so that things don't break. That's being done as well, right? So there's this concept of going concern where there's actually a team of people for the underlying technology itself that's making sure that it stays up to date, stays running. Security is the paramount concern. I don't say that lightly for Appian. It's like the number one. So things like that, we're going to make sure that we stay on top of and don't necessarily have to leave that in the hands of a business user, right? Because of all of the things that you need to worry about, the last thing you want to worry about is the guts of the tech and making sure that you're up to date on that stuff.
Yeah, I think I remember from a previous webinar, actually, I think it was someone who was on it sharing a story that, I can't remember one of the big changes came out, security issues came out, and there was a need to, and a customer got in touch saying, right, well, when do we schedule this in? We've got to plan this in. And the response was, we already implemented it, you're fine. And it's, that's the beauty of this platform. IT, I think probably, I'm sure there's some stats out there on this, but just from working with them as a business analyst in my murky past, I don't know, 10, 15% of their life is external things coming and saying, whatever you thought you were going to do, you're going to do this now because there's a scary security risk. And all of that suddenly disappears because, as you say, you've got this dedicated team doing it for everybody as an end user and just launching it into the platform once they know it's ready to go. Okay, so I think we've talked in the abstract about lots of these things now. I would like to just ask the two of you now, if you can. I think stories are a really good way for people to understand the art of the possible. And that's what I think this webinar is about. It's about the art of the possible. We can move quick, we can make changes, we can do it safely, we can get the business really bought in. I'm going to ask both of you now if you could share a story about one of your, your government agency clients, obviously respecting privacy and so on. But Vishal, since you are the last to speak, do you have a story you think really encompasses what can be done in the modern world using this kind of technology?
I do. There's one that actually that really impresses me, and it's I think an excellent use of Appian, and also is just a good sign of the time. So when COVID hit, obviously we know everything that happened, the world shut down and so on and so forth. I was one of the few that I think like some of us are lucky enough to be able to work from home. That's not necessarily true for everybody, right? There's a lot of industry that shut down, retail, and people were jobless as a result of that. So in the US, there was the American Rescue Plan Act funding. And part of that was to allow for people who had lost their jobs to stay in their homes. And one way to do that was to provide homeowner and rental assistance. Distributing those funds, taking in the applications and distributing that's a major workflow for state and local agencies. So one of our partners actually used Appian to create an application that allowed homeowners and renters to come in and apply for that assistance and receive funding. And they did it remarkably fast. They had, from the time that they signed the contract to the time that they were live, it was like a week. And in the first
Wow.
in the first 2 weeks of the application being up and running, they processed 4,000 of those claims from homeowners. So I just think, you know, again, as a state and local government person, I think, why is that level of government there? It's there to serve citizens, right? And when something like this happens, I think it's a little bit heartwarming to know that you're able to use technology to solve a problem, to give good people, you know, the type of service that they needed during that time. So for me, that's one of the big ones.
Yeah, classic example of government doing what it's really there to do. And also just greenfield site, 3 weeks later, you've already got 4,000 applications in and run through it. That's phenomenally fast when you compare it to, I don't know, trying to make changes to some IBM-based DB2 platform that's integrated with a Microsoft. Just staggering to me from my IT background. I'm going to stop because I'm going to start gushing because I just love that story. Thank you for sharing it. Manish, do you have a story you would like to sort of share that you think really encompasses a lot of what we've been talking about?
Sure. So I think I can share one of the stories that touches multiple aspects of our conversation, such as shortage of skill, enabling your internal teams, and even the approach of how to eat an elephant snowball. So we started with one of our early engagements in Australia, and of course in government. So they had a landscape. They wanted to build 4, 5, 6 different applications. The way we approached it was, okay, let's focus on one. We'll build this with you. We'll enable your team, and then we'll see where we go from there. So we worked with that department internally, build up their first application, helped enabling the internal team as well, because they were a part of the journey. So they picked up the platform exactly the same way as we were talking a couple of minutes ago. And then from there, we moved on. The internal IT team by then was enabled to an extent that they not have been only keeping the solution up to date. They have also gone ahead and built 3 different applications on the platform with minimal inputs from us. Yes, we are always there. Just as an advisor, if they need some help or guidance, we are called out. We'll sit with them and we'll say, okay, this is how you want to approach this particular problem. But what I'm trying to enforce here is it's no inputs from us precisely. It's majorly their own team building up those 3, 4 applications, and now they're looking at that entire landscape and they're rolling and they're bringing in more and more onto the platform and doing it all on their own, which is a great thing.
Yeah, self-sufficiency is a wonderful thing, and I think the ambition for a lot of government departments is it's much more affordable than bringing external parties in, and it's an interesting approach because there are, I've been around IT projects a long time, and there is almost a cynical suspicion on my part that they intentionally make it so complex that whilst you could in theory take it on yourself, you will need to spend so much money getting qualified individuals, Microsoft, to deliver on it that it's almost impossible. I apologize, I've been joined by a fly. It's almost impossible to actually do. So you have to keep paying for these external consultancies. So for them to have done that so quickly, I think, again, a wonderful story, Manish, that really emphasizes the points we've been trying to make today. We're nearing the end of our time now, and I'm sure everybody's got things to move on to with their day. So just before I summarize for us, I'm just going to ask Manish, there is anybody that is interested in dipping their toe in this low-code world, you do have an option for people, don't you, which is very accessible. Could you just very quickly outline what that is?
Absolutely. So I'll say the first and the foremost thing, as we discussed, is the community edition. So if you go just into the Appian community, likewise, I'll assume for other low-code platforms as well, you can try things out for yourself. So it's not only learning, but also trying things out in the real world where you can actually build some processes, build some applications quickly. Now, sometimes what also happens is people either are not that comfortable going ahead and exploring, or they just want someone to demonstrate this to them. So what we also offer is a 5x5 POC demo kind of thing, where we say, we'll talk to you for 5 hours so that we know what it is that you actually want out of this POC or this demo. And then we take 5 days to build that. At the end of the 5 days, what you get is a working demo. So demonstrates the speed and the flexibility and capability of the platform, and also reinforces the way we can work together in getting you from point A to point B in that long journey. So those are the options that I'll probably put forward.
Okay, 2 good options. Self-sufficiency, I like that one. I always think it's nice to give people that option. And a 5x5 if you want a little hand-holding and a little proof of how it works. Okay, so to summarize what we've talked about today, and then we're going to move to Q&A. The push for improving the technological service options for end customers, if we can call them that, from government agencies, has grown massively in the last few years, and it's coming from multiple directions. It's coming from the users themselves. Their expectations are higher and higher. It's coming from the elected officials who know that it's a vote winner for them if they can deliver these things. It's going to drive efficiencies, cut costs as well in the medium to long term. And you've got the agencies themselves desperate to unleash their own knowledge. Classic hurdles, legacy systems, silos, very limited skills in order to make changes that can be trusted. I remember once we had one person in the company where I worked who could be trusted to work on the main system. And it basically consisted of, if he went on holiday, development stopped, right? What we've got with the low-code platform is you've got something that is no longer hindered. Once it's plugged in, it doesn't touch the systems. It lets you slowly replace and add functionality whilst moving off those platforms. It helps get buy-in from perhaps somewhat jaded business users and jaded IT developers, and it's accessible to a huge number of people. And it has that classic snowballing effect. You can start very small, begin eating the elephant just a bite at a time, and as success demonstrates itself, then you're going to get more and more buy-in from the business. And I think we all know that buy-in from the business, from the organization, is one of the hardest things to find with IT projects. So really exciting. Hopefully it's adjusted some people's perspectives. If it has, please do pop in the chat. Is it giving you food for thought? But also, if you've got any questions, we're going to come to Q&A in a second. I'd also just like to thank Vishal and Manish for their time. And I would like to thank the lovely Rebecca. I know you've been busy in the chat, Rebecca. Thank you for doing that for us. And we will end the webinar there per se and move into the Q&A. So, Rebecca, what questions have we had?
We've had a few good questions. One of the questions I found was quite interesting was, how often do you find people replace legacy systems because the vendor no longer supports the original system or platform?
Okay, so how often is that a driver? Manish, what's your experience on that one?
Quite often, and it is bifold. It's not only that the vendor is not supporting that platform. The other side of it is it might as well be an application which was built in-house, but just on an aging technology, and that skill is no more available. So, yeah.
I once worked somewhere that the European expert in a particular coding language worked at the business, not because we were particularly impressive, because there were just so few people that knew that language at the time. So yeah, I absolutely get that. Vishal, in your experience, which I know might be slightly different, how often is, dear God, we've got to get off this thing quickly, the driver?
All the time, all the time. And I'll even say, in addition to the example that Manish gave, which is a really good one, there have been situations that I encounter all the time where a COTS provider or a vendor that had created a solution stopped supporting it and actually gave the code base to the agency and said, like, we give up, here you go, you can kind of maintain this on your own. And then they have, gone along for a number of years maintaining it on their own until finally it's that one person leaves, or or it's just 1 year too long.
Yeah, no, that's so great question, because yeah, it's a real reality, Rebecca. So hopefully that's answered the question for the person in the chat. Have we had any other questions?
Yes. Do IT teams resist this low code as a threat to their jobs, given it's so easy to learn?
Ooh, yes. As I said, I'm a cynic. That would be something that crossed my mind. I'm going to flip the direction I asked this question. I'm going to get them to Vishal first, Manish second. So Vishal, what's your experience?
Yeah, I do think that there's a little bit of misconception out there in terms of what this technology means, right? You even hear about things like robotic process automation. Is that going to cause people to lose their jobs en masse? And that's just not accurate, right? I think that there's a little bit of fear of the unknown, and there's a little bit of fear of change, but a lot of that, I don't want to rehash, some of the stuff that Manish talked about, but the learning curve is so short for somebody who is already a developer, has the knowledge of how the inner workings of that agency. If you're a developer, it takes you 2 weeks to learn Appian. So there isn't this idea that this new technology with a gigantic learning curve is going to put you out of work, right? It's really just an opportunity to learn something new.
Yeah, I like that. And I remember learning about a great example. I was listening to a podcast once, and they explained before Microsoft Excel, God bless Microsoft Excel, before it existed, accountancy firms, something like 30-40% of the employee's job was bookkeeping, essentially. And when Excel came along, it didn't suddenly just destroy all of these jobs. It created new jobs, more in the analysis, the analytics, the reporting side of things, giving insights. So what actually happens when a new tech like this comes along is it releases people to do more interesting, more value-add work as well.
Absolutely.
And that's what I heard. Yeah. Okay.
Dare I
Manish,
say, it made bookkeeping a little more fun, right?
we do dare. Hey, look, I am an Excel jockey. I love that. I could do a webinar on just how much I love it myself, but we won't get into that. We'll never stop. Manish, your thoughts on that question as well.
I think I can't reinforce it any more than what Vishal has put forward, and you have, rounded it up, Pete. The only thing is, yes, it is an awareness. It's a knowledge sharing that needs to happen so that people try to understand and adapt to the changes which is coming. It's there to help you. It's there to let you focus on more important things that you can do. Bring changes at a steady and faster pace so that you can respond to the business. If you're stuck to an old IT system where you are taking ages just to maintain the system, or even going back to them quite often where you're saying, oh, we can't do this because we are literally stuck in this particular spot where we are in a corner because we don't have that skill. That's not a very comfortable spot to be in. So I'll say there is another side of looking at this piece, and this is how we should be looking at it.
Okay, yeah, I like that, and I think so. It's a real concern people have. It's a fair question to ask, but the way you manage it is you set their expectations about what it's going to unleash them to do, rather than what they're going to lose out in. Okay, thank you very much, Rebecca. Do we have any more questions?
We do. The cynicism continues. So what are project timelines really like? Can they really be implemented in a few weeks?
Well, yeah, okay. So obviously we had Vishal's example, 3 weeks. Well, I think 1 week, and then at the end of 3 weeks, was that a one-off? Is that a more realistic perspective? Manish, what are your thoughts? I tell you what, let's flip that question around a little bit. What's the longest it's taken you to do a release which delivered some functionality? Because I think that's perhaps the more interesting thing.
Yeah, so it can sometimes be a little longer if you're looking at bringing a transformation at a bigger scale. The things that actually holds us back in going live is more often change management than making that change available on the platform. Because if you're going to make a big impact to a lot of people who are out there in public, and if your internal department is quite big itself, then the time that you will spend in educating the people internally and externally, that would be massive.
Yeah.
That would be massive. But to keep it short and precise, making changes on the system or making your first release, you actually don't have to wait that long. You can pick up a small thing which is going to add some value, give you the return on investment, and then you can go live in as short a period as a couple of weeks, similar to what Vishal was saying.
Yes. Well, I think I'll, for the sake of time, I know we're starting to overrun. Vishal kind of made his point with his 3-week story rather beautifully, I think, in terms of that question. And I think what you said there is a really good point. Is I remember once I was doing some work on a project and someone was saying this is going to make it faster for the agents. It's going to make it faster for the agents. And I said, it doesn't matter, come and watch. And they came and watched and they realized the agents were already moving faster than the conversation was flowing with the customer. So it would have made it faster, but it wouldn't have improved call times at all because the act of talking was too long. And you're kind of getting that point. You could go faster. The business won't move fast enough. So we've maximized our delivery speeds on that. So I like that as an answer. Thank you, Manish. Do we have any more questions, Rebecca?
I'll do just one more.
Okay.
What happens if your department uses the Microsoft Azure platform? Does Appian work on the Azure platform? So a very practical question.
That's a very practical question. I'm going to go to Vishal. See, it's Appian, it's his platform. Do you play nicely with us as Vishal?
We do. Appian has really 2 major categories of options, which one is the Appian Cloud, and that's native on AWS. The other is a deployment on basically any other cloud. It can be a private cloud situation. It can be an on-premise situation. It can be Microsoft Azure. That's not a problem at all.
Okay, a concise answer, and I think a good one. So, Rebecca, if there are no more questions, I think we can end there, can't we?
Yes.
Marvelous. Right. I would like to thank once again everybody who's attended, everybody who's used the chat, asked questions. Thank you so much. I really hope it's been useful. Please do give us some feedback on what you would like to see in future. We are thinking of doing a webinar more focused on that change management process, how you initially kick these projects off. If that's interesting, please do let us know. Otherwise, it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from Manish and Vishal. Gents, do you want to say cheerio?
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
A pleasure indeed. Right. And we are going to end there. Thank you. Cheerio.